Hello and welcome into Reality Check over here on Talkin Jets. What's going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Jeremy, aka Jets Chaos. Jeremy, we have a new coach. How you feeling today?
I'm feeling good, man. We got a head coach. Whoa. I mean, nothing is worse than that in between. I call it the phantom zone, the zone of not knowing. I hate it. I like knowing. And now, obviously we'll talk about it. We got other things ahead, other big important hires. Glenn is just a piece of it, man. His coordinator is going to be so crucial. So I'm waiting on that. And of course, what happened with the general manager situation? My God.
Yeah, we're going to go through all of it. We'll give our initial reaction to Aaron Glenn officially being hired. We'll talk about some of the candidates for some of the coordinator spots. There's a lot of names floating around for offensive coordinator right now. And also, you bring up a great point, too, about the GM. I thought it was going to be a done deal for both Aaron Glenn and Lance Newmark on Tuesday. Wanted to say how much were you panicking on Tuesday night when they, quote, left the building? I'm sure you were up in arms like everyone else on Jets Twitter, no?
I was actually making fun of them. It was so stupid because the whole thing about don't let him leave the building is just basically, I know nothing about how anything in the real world works. That's how I hear it when someone says it. Yeah, there are times where someone comes to the building and by the time they leave, they're willing to go to the media and say they have a deal or whatever. I think that there's a million possibilities of why it happened the next day. And I don't want to sit there and speculate on why. I mean, we could sit here and name all the different reasons why. It could have literally been some legal language, or I want my lawyer to look over the contract. There's like a million explanations of why it took the extra night to become official. But the panic over it was just out of control.
Yeah, I mean, short-term memory, no? The same thing happened with Robert Saleh that happened with Aaron Glenn. He left. He came in on a night. I forget if it was a Tuesday or what day of the week it was. But anyway, he leaves. And then the next day got hired. And the same thing happened with Aaron Glenn. And obviously, I think we're hoping for a better end result with Aaron Glenn than what we were able to see with Robert Saleh. But I thought the panic was all a little bit much. Everyone was still under the assumption, at least the insiders, that this was going to get done here. You know what? I know specifically, I know how you feel about it. And I same for me. So Aaron Glenn was not my number one overall choice to be the Jets head coach. But even with that in mind, I still thought he was a very good head coaching candidate. I would say he was in my top 4, either number 3 or number 4 for me in this head coaching cycle. But I do think that there's a lot to get excited about with Aaron Glenn. And I get it. Like, I'm not going to completely dismiss the people who go, great, it's another first-time head coach and someone from the defensive side of the ball. Understandable if that's your initial reaction. The thing that stands out and something that I hope is very different with Aaron Glenn, he's saying all the right things right now. He's got to put it to actual, pen to paper and actually do it. But it seems like he is very adamant about not just being a defensive coach and instead trying to be that overall leader style of a head coach in the similar vein of, like, I'm not saying he's necessarily going to be as good, even though I would love for that to be the case, but like a Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin's a defensive coach, but an overall leader. Mike Vrabel, kind of the same thing, a defensive coach, more so of that CEO style, though. I'm assuming based off his comments that he's made, that's what Aaron Glenn is aiming for as well.
Yeah, I mean, first off, yeah, I have no shame in admitting it. There were guys I wanted more than Aaron Glenn, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean because you have guys you'd rather have that it has to be, oh my God, we're so stupid, we're so dumb. No. It doesn't mean that the Jets, there are people saying the Jets messed up the hire. It's like, no, just because it's not the guy you wanted. What do we know? We're not in the interviews. It's like so funny that we all individually put so much stock into our own opinions about something we know maybe 5% about, and the 95% we have no clue about. Like what's going on with the interview, what a million other people in the NFL are saying behind closed doors. Like, come on. So yeah, I'm with you, man. He wasn't my first choice based on my limited knowledge and ability to just look at what was in front of us, right? There was choices I would have rather had. But the reality is this was a highly touted candidate. This was a guy that was desired by other teams. And I think it's important to say that because there was misinformation yesterday on 𝐀𝐮𝐫𝐚's show. He had some guy making stuff up. And this is the problem with some of what we have goes on in our world is people will come on and mix up their opinions with reality, right? So when someone comes on and says Aaron Glenn only got interviews with New Orleans and the Jets because he played for us, nobody else wanted him, that is a false statement. This was a highly touted candidate, top of the list, like even before the offseason. Like he was looked upon as one of the guys that was in line to be a head coach. And the reaction of every respectable person, Sean Payton, Bill Barca, you could go down the list, was even his own head coach, Campbell, it would have been a crime if Aaron Glenn was not promoted to head coach this year and we went through another cycle without it happening. So, look, all that's aside, I am now all in on Aaron Glenn and putting 100% of my support behind Aaron Glenn. And like someone said in the chat, am I going to get all pumped up and excited and start screaming we're going to win the Super Bowl? No, I'm never making that mistake again. I'm just going to root for him and hope he's great. But I'm not going to sit there running around and saying, oh, we're great now. No. I'm going to wait for the performance on the field first.
Yeah, it's kind of what Matthias is saying here. We will see just how good Aaron Glenn will be. I'm not going to get all hyped up with this team again till they prove it. I'll reserve my emotional head over heels after they show us. And completely valid. After the season that the Jets just put us through in 2024, it's hard not to have that reaction. At the same time, another reason for excitement too, I think it would mean more if it works with Aaron Glenn because of what he means to this organization, right? Like he was drafted here. He was an awesome player here. He was part of a turnaround. Like the Jets were horrible in the mid 90s. Bill Parcells gets here in 97, completely changes the culture. And they're like a legitimate franchise for 10, 15 years, through the 2010, 2011 season. And plus, like when he tried to get back into football, his first job was back with the Jets as a scout. And when he was looking to become a head coach, his first choice was the Jets. And he had other options too. You mentioned New Orleans. He coached there for a long time, obviously still has connections there. I'm sure he would have loved that opportunity. I know Dallas and Jacksonville were interested in him as well. So it's not like this is some, Joe Blow that only the Jets interviewed and they had to settle for Aaron Glenn. As you mentioned, I think both Lions coordinators were maybe talked about the most this cycle, both Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. And the Jets got one of those two guys. And yes, he happens to come from the defensive side of the ball. But like I said, with some of the things that he's said and some of his comments that he's made, either in interviews or, press conferences in the past, I think he's going to really try to become someone who is that CEO style of coach. And maybe this is a good spot to start talking about some people that he could bring with him. I think there's a good chance that he could build a pretty respectable coaching staff around him as well.
Yeah, I think he has a lot of respect in the league. And look, it's on the surface, it's very easy to say another rookie defensive coordinator or head coach. Oh my God, it's Robert Saleh all over again. But if you actually listen and you've watched what he's even said so far, it is so vastly different than Robert Saleh. And I'm not bringing this up to bash Robert Saleh. I'm just making a point that these are two different people. It's not the same. You can't. It's so surface. It's so freaking fluff to just say defensive coordinator, rookie coach, same thing. No, it's not. Robert Saleh was like known. We watched it to the point where he admitted it before his last year. Oh, I'm going to get more involved with the offense. I'm actually going to go into the room. So we know he didn't. We know that he didn't touch the offense, that he didn't communicate with the offense. He wasn't a head coach or a leader to the offense. He admitted it by saying he was going to fix it as a problem. Whereas Glenn is coming in totally different and saying, I'm not a defensive coach or an offensive coach. I'm a head coach. I'm a coach of players. And that's exactly what I want, because in my little bits of success as a Jet fan, our best coaches, you never felt it. Even with Rex Ryan, as defensive minded as he was with the blitzing and this and that, when he was the head coach, he was the coach of the New York Jets. He was Mark Sanchez's coach. He got a Mark Sanchez tattoo on him, right? So this wasn't a guy who avoided the offensive room. This, right? Bill Parcells, we all know. Most people, if you're not old enough, don't even know if Parcells was defensive or offensive early in his career. They don't even know.
Right.
Because he was a full head coach. And Aaron Glenn, look, he hasn't proven anything yet. We don't know yet. But everything he says, his attitude, the approach coming in is completely night and day from Robert Saleh, good or bad, whatever. It's different. So to sit there and just say it's the same thing all over again, it's just not true.
And one of my other favorite things too and this isn't just coming from, I don't know, watching, 5 minutes of Hard Knocks and figuring this out, but even Bill Parcells said this yesterday about Aaron Glenn, saying like, he's not afraid to have the confrontation or the hard conversations. And I think that's a really big change as well from the Jets' last regime. Yeah. For Saleh, clearly a player's coach, and guys loved him and played hard for him. Like, not going to take that away from him. And again, like Jeremy said, I don't want this to be we're just going to bash the guy that was here previously. But I do think one of his shortcomings was he was almost like too buddy-buddy with the guys. And I think that Aaron Glenn will have the ability to get on his guys a little bit more and, read him the riot act a little bit if need be. It might have been his interview on the Pivot podcast or on one of his appearances. He essentially went through and was like, I need to see 3 things from my guys. It was like, intent. I forget what the exact ones, but I'm going to paraphrase it. It was essentially like intensity, violence, and, something else. And he's like, if you don't have, if you're not showing one of the 3, that's an issue. And if you're not showing all 3, go play for somebody else because you're a traitor. Go play for the other team. And like, that's like, we would never hear someone like Robert Saleh say anything like that. Robert Saleh would talk up Chaz Surratt like he's going to the Hall of Fame one day. So yeah. I think that would be a massive like culture shock in a way to this organization.
I mean, we saw it and it used to bother the hell out of me. We saw it when they would draft the players. He was like a fan. He'd get on the phone, Sauce. And I knew people think that was cool, that he was excited about the fact that we got Sauce Gardner, but that's not the relationship you want to start out with the head coach and the player, that he's yelling Sauce. And and they showed him on Hard Knocks running around the field. I'm going to go bother this guy. I'm going to go mess with him, and just being like, dude, at practice during training camp, that's what you're doing, goofing around with the players. It's like, no, I want you to have a relationship with him. I want you to talk to them, but I also want it to be about being the coach and establishing the head coach player relationship, which doesn't have to be you're an asshole and that you're cold and closed off to them, but it also doesn't have to be you're their fan. That's like pandering to them. And I think, again, the perfect example is, and we had the coach here, is, there's no better example of it than Bill Parcells, because he was a player's coach 100%. That was 100% hold his players accountable. No bullshit. He'll rip that freaking, in Dallas, he would take the star off their helmets and say, you didn't earn this star, right? But yet the players loved him. So there's a balance. There's an art to it of being loved. Yes, respected, loved, but also, I'm not messing with this guy. I'm not going over the line. I know that there's a line, and he's my coach.
Swamp Ranger sends in a super chat. Thank you for the support. Swamp says, people freaking out over them not hiring a GM first. Coaches develop players. Coaches can identify talent. Need to nail the OCDC and coaching staff hires. I do think it's a little unorthodox that they went this route. But to me, I think this indicates that they really want Glenn to be the face of their franchise. With Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, it was very clear that Joe Douglas was the face of the Jets on the organizational side. Clearly, like there's players who are faces of the franchise, but I think in a perfect world, they view Aaron Glenn in what the Seahawks had Pete Carroll in, as he was pretty much the face of that program. And yes, the GM's obviously going to have a role, but Glenn's scouting background kind of makes you believe he's going to have some sort of say here on this roster, I would think.
Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely. I mean, look, that's another thing we don't even talk about is when you talk about what people's roles are, you just triggered something in me also. When you talk about Aaron Glenn as far as his towards the players kind of thing, also, how is Aaron Glenn going to handle Woody Johnson?
Valid.
Right. And like, is he the type of personality that's going to, and we saw Solid do it at the end of the last year season where he was kind of slumped down and he looked like a beaten man. And like, I don't want to see my head coach ever slump down like a beaten man. You know what I mean? So, that's another thing to be excited, I think, about Aaron Glenn, and another change or something different that we need to see in fans in a head coach that we brought back from the past and revitalized is a guy that's going to come in and be like, not afraid. Like, I want a guy that's willing to go up to the owner and say, you hired me and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Like, I'm not going to bench a guy because you tell me to bench him. And I'm not, if you want to fire me, fire me. And I get, and I don't know that that's Aaron Glenn, but I get the sense there's more of a chance we have that guy than we did with the previous regime.
Correct.
You know what I mean? We don't know for sure that he's willing to do that, but he certainly feels like he's more willing to do that.
100%. Dylan's hanging out with us from Jets Nation, says, excited about this hire, guys. See you next week, Jeremy. I can't wait for all the content that's going to come out of Mobile, Alabama next week. I am amped up for that.
Yeah, man, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy down there, and those who don't know, Dylan, actually, we share a house with, we do this, me, Dom C, and Dylan are like the three of us together the whole time. So I was just telling Matt before, I said, I don't have to worry if I over order food when I'm down there, because Dylan is like, just, whatever I have extra, I just give to him. It's like, he's young, he'll just gobble it up. But no, we had a great time last year, and it's going to be super, super exciting, especially next week. We were talking about it before the show. Next week, we're probably going to run the show with me calling in from the field, like being on the field. So that's going to be great. And we'll probably have, I estimate, about 25 to 30 new interviews with new prospects. So that's going to be exciting too.
Can't wait for it. Dante chimes in with the super chat too. Thank you, Dante. Says, do you think AG will put something in his contract about Woody interfering? I remember people talking about that with Vrabel. Think AG should do it too. I don't know if in a perfect world, yeah, right. But I think that, or I'd be surprised if that wasn't one of the things that was discussed, right? Like, to me, if I'm going into interview for the Jets, that's one of my first, in every interview you've ever been in for a job, they always go, do you have any questions for us? My first one would be, yeah, there's been a ton of stories that cite, Woody Johnson or you as an owner who is, very hands-on. What does that look like? Is that something that is going to, impact me in what I'm trying to do, and see what the answer is?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know if that's something, I don't know about contracts enough to know, if an owner is going to put it in a contract that he can't be involved in his own team. I don't know if Woody's signing that off, but I can't imagine, based on the stories that were coming out, I can't imagine that wasn't a conversation, that there wasn't a conversation of, I want a GM that also is not going to tell me, he's going to respect my role as the coach. And I'll respect the GM's roles, work with the GM as far as talent, personnel, what I need on my team. And that it wasn't part of the conversation, even brought up by Woody, saying, I know you may have heard stories. Because remember, there was contrary stories to that too. There were some stories of, Rex Ryan came out and said, and maybe it was just because he wanted a job and he's full of crap, but he said, I didn't have that issue at all with Woody Johnson. Yeah, he came out and said he never bothered me. So I don't, I can't see Woody just fessing up and saying, "Yeah, I was a real idiot. I messed up really bad." I see it more being, like he's going to give his side of it, but I think what's important is what's being discussed and what comes out of it, and understanding of, you know, we can't have your son or you or whatever interfering with us and telling us who we have to bench and who we don't have to bench. And, I have another opportunity in New Orleans. And guess what? They don't have a reputation for doing that. So it's, you know what I mean? Why would he take our job without getting that clearance and making sure? Because any of us, if we were qualified to be head coach, isn't that any of us, after what we've seen this team go through in the last 12 months, is there any of us that wouldn't ask that if we had another job offer, that wouldn't say, I don't want to come into a shit show?
Right, exactly. Because like we've said with Glenn, he had numerous opportunities. Sure, he wanted the Jets job the most, but not that I don't think Woody Johnson would come flat out and say this, but if Woody Johnson was like, yeah, I'm going to be the one, you got to run everything by me, I'm the final decision maker, maybe that does impact his decision. So yeah. I think it's worthwhile to at least discuss. I wanted to get your take on some of the both offensive and defensive coordinators and potential options that the Jets have. We'll start with offensive coordinator because with Glenn being a defensive coach, I think that's what most are interested in. And there's been a lot of names tossed around. Mark Brunell, who's the quarterback coach for the Lions, is one. Nick Caley, who is with the Los Angeles Rams, spent a lot of time as a tight ends coach in New England. Clint Kubiak is another name, and Scott Turner, I feel like, are the names that have been talked about the most. Although Albert Breer did mention Josh McCown, but I am not so optimistic that Josh McCown takes an OC job. I think he'd probably stay in Minnesota.
I think that's what he said. He'd have to. So that would have to be him changing his mind.
Exactly. So anyway, of the names that have been mentioned so far, is there one that really stands out to you, or what do you like about some of these guys?
I like this guy from the Rams only because I like that he was the tight ends coach for New England, involved at a time when Brady was there and they were scoring lots of points and they were, and they were a good offense. And there was absolutely some good coaching on that team. As much as we hate the Patriots, it's crazy, and I hope we don't even have to have this argument with anyone. It's not enough just to have Brady. There had to be some competent coaching in the building, right? You don't win because of one player. I don't care how good that player is. So the fact that he was there around winning, right? The fact that he was with one of the greatest offensive minds in the NFL, for the last 2 years with the Rams, that stuff looks good. I don't know. Other than that, did he have we know he was promoted to pass game coordinator really quickly by a freaking great head coach that's offensive minded. So we know that there's some positives. He did some things right to win the trust of his head coach to get promoted. So there's some good things there, but I'm not going to sit there and pretend, then it's a fact. I think it's a reasonable candidate for us to be talking to. And then again, I'm gonna try to go with I will judge them when they come here and do their job, and acknowledge that there's no way I could possibly truly know if they're going to be good or bad. We can only have opinions. I like where he's coming from. I like the background. I like the Mark Brunell name for sure, and I like the Kubiak name for the same reasons. Just for their exposure in the league, knowing that they're offensive minded, that they seem like they have the resume to come in and truly be ready to be an offensive coordinator.
I think most likely the name that comes up the most, I think, is Nick Caley. And supposedly that's who Glenn wants the most. That's like what's been reported. Yeah. So I think there's a good chance that's who it's going to be. But I think my personal favorite for the job would be Clint Kubiak. And you look at his resume, I honestly think it's pretty impressive. So was the Minnesota Vikings quarterback coach in 2019 and 20 when they obviously had, Kirk Cousins as their quarterback. Yeah. And then he was an offensive coordinator there for 1 year. And then the staff got cleared out after 2021. And he was top half of the league in both yards and points, 12th in yards, 14th in points. He was then a quarterbacks coach and passing game coordinator for a year in Denver. Then he went to San Francisco as the pass game coordinator in 2023. And obviously that offense was pretty damn good in 23. And then this year with the Saints, the initial eye test doesn't look pretty with offense ranking 21st and 24th in points. But in the 10 games that Derek Carr was healthy, their offense averaged 25 points a game. And then in the 7 games he wasn't healthy, they averaged 13. So that's pulls it down a ton after that.
You're going against a lot of our fan base believe in, Matt. You're doing what's called critical thinking. To tear, like, it's amazing to me how fast people will point to what looks like a negative without looking under the cover, right? Will point to a negative and erase everything the coach did. Because even if he didn't, okay, without Carr, he wasn't as good, right? He didn't do as well. But even if that's true, what person in any job in any field in the world is just year after year elite? Like, to say, like, is that really our criteria, that you're going to look at a resume of a football coach and say that every year, everywhere they've been, they have to be top of the league, and they're never allowed to have one little question mark on their resume? And then when you look at it and you give the information you just gave, when he had his starting quarterback, they were fine. 25 points a game. How hungry have we been to say that we have a team that can score 25 plus points a game on average?
Yeah, the Jets were nowhere close to that. They averaged under 20. It was like 19 point something this year. And in Minnesota, it was, I believe, and he had Kirk Cousins for 16 of the 17 games in 2021. And they averaged, they'll give you the exact number. It was in the 24s. It was, it was 20. It was also 25 points per game. 25.0.
And this is New Orleans going through this whole transformation, right? They got all their salary issues. They lost wide receivers. They got young Olave. He's good, but then they got a Kamara who's still good, but he's still, he might not fit that system because, I mean, there's so much going on and change in New Orleans. They're not in good shape right now, right? They had their long run with Peyton, and you could tell that they're in this rebuilding mode. And like you said, when you gave him Derek Carr, who's not a world beater, but he's a functional NFL quarterback by every measure, he was able to put together an offense that was efficient and worked and scored points. So guess what? It might be a little ugly here year one. We don't know what our quarterback situation is going to be, right? If Rodgers stays, then maybe he could get 25 points, 25 plus points a game. If Rodgers doesn't stay, I mean, how judgmental are we going to be on this coaching staff year one when we are coming in with question mark at quarterback, when it's Tyrod Taylor, who I don't hate, but come on, he's not a starting quarterback. He's he's been a perennial backup quarterback for the last how many years? I mean, then what's the criteria? What's the number of points per game do we need to score under any coordinator in that circumstance?
Right. And again, obviously just wanted to add the full context to it. And I think when you look at it with Clint Kubiak, with his starting quarterback, he's been very successful. And, he's young, ascending coach. He's 37 years old. I think, everyone's kind of looking for that next young, hot coordinator. And maybe Nick Caley is that guy. He hasn't called plays yet, but learning under McVay the last 2 years has got to be pretty damn good. I think McVay's one of the top, at worst, top 5 play callers in the NFL. And as much as we hate Belichick, if Belichick is praising the guy, there's probably something to it. So I think one of those two guys are probably most likely to get it. Maybe Brunell, because he obviously just had him in Detroit. But to add on to this conversation and sticking with the offensive side of the ball, something that really excites me too is he's looking at veteran options. Like someone like Todd Haley has been listed to be some sort of offensive assistant. Now, it's been a long time since Todd Haley's been an offensive coordinator in this league, but he was even a head coach at one point. And yeah, he's a little nutty and a little intense, but the Jets never had, on that last regime, they didn't have that veteran coach who's been there and done it before. And if Glenn was able to land a guy like Haley and get him to come here, I think that'd be really impressive.
Yeah, look, and I think you go back to another really good point. This is all Aaron Glenn, right? So if you're on board with supporting Aaron Glenn, you have to allow this room to trust his opinions, especially more than us. Like if you're sitting in there saying, like if we hire one of these guys and you're cursing and saying they're stupid, how do you possibly think you know more than Aaron Glenn? He's like in that world. Like these guys all know each other. It's a big fraternity kind of thing. They all endorse each other. They congratulate each other. They have reputations amongst their own community. I mean, do we really think we know? We're just going by the outside layer, the icing on the cake of what we're judging, right? The reality is the names we're talking about are all potentially guys who might come in and succeed, and they all potentially might come in and fail. That's a given. We know that with coaching. That's just a given. There's no sure thing, but it's not disgusting. I mean, there are times where you go out and you bring in a coach and it's gross, right? And you're like, when it's blatantly gross, nobody could tell me that any of these guys we're talking about for offensive coordinator is a gross hire, especially the moment one of them is hired and you know that Aaron Glenn is giving his endorsement with the amount of years he's been in this league and with the mentors he has and the people he's talking to. You have to just assume he's making a good informed hire.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. Like if you're going to buy into Aaron Glenn, let him hire the guys that he's comfortable with. You don't have to nitpick each one.
Yeah, and that's when you say coming in as a defensive mind. If you don't think a defensive mind knows who good offensive minds are, you're crazy. He knows who challenged him in the league. He knows by standing on the other side, by having to stop those offenses, which coaches offensively may have done a really good job. Like he has more of an understanding than we could ever have. When you're competing against anyone, you learn so much about your competitors when you compete against them. So he's competed against a lot of these guys. So he's went against their systems. I mean, it's, he has information we don't have.
What do you think of the idea? Because there's really only been one name tossed around a whole lot for the Jets defensive coordinator, and that's Steve Wilkes, who has head coaching experience, was a DC most recently in 2023 with the San Francisco 49ers. They finished 4th in yards and 2nd in touchdowns. Eighth in yards and 3rd in points allowed. What would you make of him bringing in a guy who's been a head coach to be his DC?
I think it's important when you have part of making it. I mean, this was the intention when we hired Saleh, right? He died on a bike accident. Like we had a coach that was going to come in with experience, but to actually have a coordinator. Like if your defensive coordinator is going to be someone that comes in with experience. Plus, what I love about this is our personnel right now, at least for the time being, that is the you could change personnel, but the reality is the personnel we have right now fits what Wilkes would do, right? I mean, obviously, come in with it's pretty much an extremely similar scheme, so we're already built for the kind of defense that he would run, which is a positive. But also for Aaron Glenn to be surrounded or have a coordinator that has been a head coach that is experienced, to learn from not only the positives but the negatives, like the mistakes. These are mistakes that I made. Really, really helpful. Like really, much better than a situation where you're surrounded by two people that are very inexperienced, and it's the three of you. Like, again, not to bash them, but I don't want the rinse repeat of we're all gonna learn together. Like, no, like give me a guy who's done it, right? Give me a guy in those rooms, in those locker rooms, that has been there, done that, and could offer that to Aaron Glenn as a rookie head coach.
Yeah, I think it's perfect. I mean, he doesn't have a ton of coaching experience. He went one and done in Arizona in 2018, but then in 2022, as the interim in Carolina, they actually did okay. They were 6-6 in the 12 games after he took over in 2022, and then had a successful year the following year in San Francisco as the DC. So that excites me. He's older than Glenn, so he's kind of that veteran who's been there and done it before, who maybe you could rely on a little bit. I think it's important.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great thing when you talk about it's not easy to get a defensive coordinator right now or an offensive coordinator that actually has experience in the job that isn't terrible because why do they not have a job? Like, this seems like this wonderful opening of an opportunity because we have a guy who, when you look at his performance last year for the Niners, wasn't bad. Like, he wasn't horrible. Or if you look at his resume overall, it's not horrible. And going 6-6 with Carolina, 22, that roster, are you kidding me? This is a guy who that tells me he gets a lot out of his players, because that was a horrible roster.
Yeah, and he had Josh Rosen as his quarterback in 2018, who the Cardinals got rid of instantly and drafted Kyler Murray.
Right, one and dones when it's an organization like Arizona, especially at that time. I know they're a little better now, but when you look at what Arizona was from 2010 to 2020, and you look at a one and done coach, there's no way that he should be judged in his entirety on that. Like, that's unfair.
Totally. I like this comment from our guy. Dano says, we could have done so much worse already at head coach, like picking a guy nobody wants to be with. He says, I don't know if you've I'm sure you have, but this is more rhetorical. Look at what's going on in Jacksonville and Dallas right now with those situations. So pretty much everyone has told the Jacksonville Jaguars no. Like, Liam Cohen backed out of the race. They then had to, after the fact, fire Balky, the general manager, way late in the game. They should have done this at the end of the year when they got rid of the coach, and then they waited an extra 2 weeks to do that. They are an absolute mess right now. So much so that Robert Saleh is like the only one left who wants to take the job. He might very well go from the Jets right into coaching Jacksonville. And apparently we might be a few hours away from Brian Schottenheimer getting hired as a head coach to be the Dallas Cowboys coach.
And if we would have kept Saleh, 90% of our fan base would have hung themselves, right? Or we said we made a mistake, we're going to rehire Saleh. Nobody wants that hire. And can you imagine if we had brought in a second interview and we're very close to signing Brian Schottenheimer as our coach, as our head coach, what this fan base would be doing?
Yeah, it could be worse. And celebrating over it could be worse is obviously not where you want to be. You want to be celebrating the successes, but it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the opening segment of the show, where it's the Jets got a pretty respectable head coaching candidate. And you look at some of these other teams who still have job openings, and you have names like Brian Schottenheimer and Robert Saleh, who are very close to getting new contracts to be head coaches next year.
Yeah. And look, if you're someone out there that believes, that's defending Saleh, which is fine, because I believe that you never know. He might actually have success in Jacksonville, because he'll have a quarterback. You get Trevor Lawrence, if he gets the right OC, and he builds his kind of solid defense, all of a sudden they could be a real team. So, but if you believe that, and you're saying, if you're someone who believes that, then you can't be so critical of when we hire candidates or talk to candidates that have blemishes on their resume, because what would we be saying if Saleh was never a Jets head coach and we were getting a coach that just got fired from a team after 3 years that had the record he had? We'd be slicing their necks. We'd be saying, this is like, well, suicide. Well, just like Saleh might end up being okay in Jacksonville, and you could actually draw up a way that it actually doesn't seem that crazy. Like, oh, good quarterback, finally has an offense that could score points, builds a top defense. Oh my God, I'm scared because we might have to watch Saleh succeed. Well, that's the argument of why you can't just look at the surface for any hire. You have to look under the covers. Now, I'm not saying that Saleh is going to succeed in Jacksonville, but I'm painting a picture of, if he did, how you could explain it.
Exactly. I want to pull this up to share. As you were talking, we got an update from the Don Hahn and Rosenberg show on ESPN Radio. They were talking to Mike Westhoff, who had some, I don't know what the right word even really is on this, some interest, or there was some potential spark of him potentially being the next Jets. I can't even find the screen that I want to share here. I'm having a rough go of it right now, Jeremy. All right, I'll just read it because I can't find the screen. I'm on fun fact. So I'm on Firefox right now, which I never use. I'm a Google Chrome guy. Ooh. But StreamYard hasn't been working for me on Google Chrome, but it works on Firefox. And the share screen function off of Firefox is not great. I don't love it, if I'm being completely honest with you. So anyway, I'll just instead read what was said. So apparently Mike Westhoff told Don LaGreca on the show that he is not coaching again, but helping out Aaron Glenn with potential hires and will be volunteering his services to work with the Jets during training camp.
These are just huge endorsements. And this comes from, obviously his history with the Jets, but also his, where he was in Denver with Glenn's mentor. So they have they have Peyton in common. It just shows that inside the community of the coaching world in the NFL, Aaron Glenn is highly respected and has a lot of support.
100%. And the name that I think makes the most sense is Darren Rizzi, who was just the Saints interim head coach. He was the longtime special teams guy in New Orleans. And obviously, as we know, Aaron Glenn spent a lot of time in New Orleans, and Mike Westhoff also spent time with New Orleans too after leaving the Jets. So I think that's an obvious connection that people can make. And he was a damn good special teams coach. I know he obviously didn't do much as an interim in like half a season, whatever it was that he coached, but that would be, I think, an improvement at least a positional coach on special teams.
What a dumb way for a team to hurt themselves. We're going to make this coach the interim head coach, and when it doesn't work, we're just going to let him get away or go somewhere else and then lose him as what he was good at, which is a special teams coach. That hire would be another like blessing for us. You know what I mean? Like, wow. Another example where we get an experienced guy who was really not fired for being bad at his job, like a guy that did fine, right? And is good and solid at his position. And it's another great thing for Aaron Glenn because he gets an experienced guy. He doesn't have to worry about that room that I got this guy I have to worry about because he's a rookie and, is everything okay? You know what you're doing, or is something going wrong? Like, it's another piece where he could just delegate, where he could check in on, go in the room, overlook what's going on, make sure it fits what he wants, fits the culture, but allow this guy to just do his job, knowing that this guy knows how to run a special teams unit. And when the games come and it's Sunday, that it's not something we're going to have to worry about.
Yep. 100%. Wanted to go to Tigo here. He's hanging with us. What's going on? Says Rizzi still in the running for the Raiders job. So maybe he will get a head coaching opportunity. And Alvin Kamara was very vocal about him wanting Rizzi to come back as the Saints coach, but still a lot of hires to be made. And it just goes back to, the Jets got Aaron Glenn. There's a real chance that maybe Rizzi's a head coach and guys like Brian Schottenheimer and Robert Saleh are head coaches in this cycle too. So I think the Jets are doing okay here.
I for someone who originally had strong reservations about Aaron Glenn, man, do I feel better about it in the last 36 hours. I really do. Just based on everything that's being said around the league, and then taking the people I wanted out of the equation and saying this is the reality, and then focusing in on Aaron Glenn just as the coach changes the way you start thinking, because now you're not thinking about anybody else. You're just thinking about, is this the guy? And, again, I'm not going to sit there and say he is or he isn't. What I'm going to say is it's not a joke. It's not oh my God, this is disgusting. And I think I said it 2 weeks ago when we talked. I said, Aaron Glenn, I always defined him as a candidate that has a very low floor, but also a very high ceiling because he's a rookie and he's an unknown.
Yep.
We just don't know. So as a fan, I'm going to be excited about the high ceiling because what else am I supposed to do except be hopeful and hope that this is going to be the magical hire that changes our lives, because I've had 40 plus years of waiting for the magical hire.
I like this question from Dano. If we want to talk about this, so maybe we close the show in the last 15 minutes or so with this. We have the last GM opening. Does that help or hurt us? This is the last GM opening, and the Jets apparently it looked like they were going to hire Lance Newmark with Aaron Glenn.
What about Jacksonville? They don't still have an opening?
Oh, well, that's true. Well, Jacksonville's just opened as of yesterday, so they do. So that's not technically true. But the Jets did not hire Lance Newmark. Instead, they interviewed two more candidates for a second opportunity here. What do you think happened there? Do you think they had a deal and it fell through? Do you think they just wanted to see if maybe there were better options out there? What do you think happened?
There's a million possibilities, right? So anything I say, I want to clarify, is 100% speculation and opinion or guessing, because there's been no leak about this. We have no idea why he wasn't signed. It could literally have been that. And I don't want to start controversy or anything. For all we know, we thought they were friends. We thought he liked them. It could have been Aaron Glenn. Like, they separated them, separate interviews. He could have said, I really don't like this guy, or this is not the guy. Or it might have been him, that guy, saying, it might have been him saying, I don't know about Glenn. There's coaches I'd rather bring in. Like, we don't know that they were in unison and in sync together. We don't know. And I have no doubt in my mind, though, about this. There had to be a point where they said to Aaron Glenn, we're not necessarily making this guy an offer. Are you okay with that? The fact that they're interviewing 2 more people and everything, I don't think they just made Glenn think that this was going to be the GM and not tell him, hey, we're going to talk to other people. We're not decided yet. They definitely ran that by Aaron Glenn. So, apparently he just didn't close. The guy came in, he was a serious candidate, and my guess is that it wasn't that we didn't offer him enough money or anything like that. My guess is that he did not close. He did not sell himself and close the deal.
It's possible. I don't think Newmark's out of the running. But I think they wanted to get a look at these 2 other guys, which are Darren Moogie from the Broncos, the assistant GM. He's been the AGM since, I believe, 2022. And then Trey Brown, who is with the Bengals. Interesting career path for Trey Brown. He ended up leaving the NFL to go to the XFL for a year or 2, and then came back to the Bengals as a scout in 2021, and quickly worked his way up to a senior personnel executive. So, do you have a favorite option here? Is there someone that's like, oh, I want that guy, I definitely don't want these other 2, or do you have a strong feeling?
I don't. Denver sounds better than Cincinnati. You could you could make surface level opinions, right? So here's my surface level opinion. You had Burrows as your quarterback, and you couldn't build a better team.
Yeah, they haven't drafted very well outside of that the last couple of years.
And I don't know his role on it. That maybe the guys he wanted to draft were the right guys, and they're the best players all over the league. We don't know that, right? Because he wasn't the GM. So he could have been screaming and pounding the table, and he would have been right, and Denver would be winning Super Bowls right now. Now, on the flip side of that very surface view and opinion, Denver had to eat a crazy salary cap hit. Like the the Wilson thing, people thought they were going to be much worse. They were much better than expected. Did he have something to do with that? Did he help make good decisions? Or is he just good because he has the experience of, I know what it's like to be in a room that just burned $90 million in dead cap and still managed to keep things together and field a team. And maybe that's an experience we're going to want to have, because we're about to burn a lot of money on possibly Aaron Rodgers, right? We're going to have a huge dead cap, whether it's next year or in 26. We're going to have we have a lot of money, dead cap money coming.
Either next year or the year after, they're going to have to eat their lumps or take their lumps.
So, you say the Denver guy, there's a guy who just had to live through that, right? So there's some experience in that. So there's that, right? But these are all surface level things. At the end of the day, I think that I'm taking comfort in the fact that they're talking to a lot of people and being very thorough. And I think there's a lot of ridiculous judgment there. People saying that it's a bad thing that we're talking to all these people criticizing this group 33. And I think it's all nonsense. The fact that we're talking to all these assistant GMs from these different organizations, I like that. I think that means we're not being emotional. We're being thorough.
Jay Taylor comes in with the super chat, says, wonder if Newmark gets another front office position within the organization and they hire one of these other guys as GM. That's entirely possible too. Newmark is an assistant GM right now in Washington. So I think he would need some sort of promotion in order to change spots, right? Like that's what my feeling on it would be.
Yeah. Why would you walk away from Jaden Daniels and the up and coming Washington Redskins? If you don't get the GM job for us, and you don't have another offer, you stay there. They're on the verge of great things, and then that's going to build his resume even more.
I think you could maybe make the case for that being so for maybe like Trey Brown, who is just some sort of senior executive with the Bengals. What was it? Senior personnel executive is his title.
Yeah, so assistant GM is upward movement.
Exactly. So maybe you make the case for Brown. Darren Moogie's also an assistant GM, so I don't really know how much further up they could offer him, the Jets being, but I think there's an interesting thought from Jay Taylor here and trying to figure out what happened because, as we said on Tuesday, it felt like a done deal that both these guys were going to be here.
Yeah. The whole thing with the GM, I'm not going to lie. I'm shocked. Like, I really thought this was a combo deal. I thought that I thought it was like literally the decision was, do we want this team? I thought it was like a unit. And clearly that's not the case. I mean, we still might hire him, but it's not the case. Like, it definitely shows the fact that we're interviewing 2 more people and didn't close the deal shows that this is not a package deal. This is an individual hires. We did not bring in a combo package here, which I think is good. I think it's good because sometimes the hierarchy gets confusing when you bring in 2 guys together. Like, oh, we're coming in together. We're linked. No, I want there to be the real hierarchy. Whoever we bring in as the GM, like moving forward in 2 to 3 years, if there's a decision to be made, hopefully not. Hopefully Glenn is lights out, the best coach we've ever had. But if there's a decision to be made, I want to make sure that we have the proper and appropriate hierarchy where it's the GM that's in charge of that decision. And not the other. I don't want a battle of power between my coach and my GM. So I hope that what this means is independently, we're hiring a GM that's going to have in the hierarchy, the appropriate place, which is they're the boss of the head coach.
Right. So I'm very interested to see how that ends up shaking out here. I like this comment from Dylan. Says Trey Brown was with 3 franchises that went to the Super Bowl, but it's hard to know what input he had. Obviously, I'd be fine with either of these GM options. That's such the tough part, right? Because we don't know who they were banging the table for in those draft meetings. Because the GM's name is the one who gets attached to it. And it could be, maybe one of the assistants is like, I don't know, let's just use Patrick Mahomes as the example. Maybe one of the assistants like, they got to draft Patrick Mahomes. And then they finally, Brett Veach does it. Or, whoever was the GM at the time, might have been Dorsey. But point being, the GM always gets the credit, but we have no idea what the scout or the people below him were really saying about some of the guys that they either A, drafted, or B, didn't draft that he wanted them to.
Look, if John, and I'm saying this in total serious, I'm not even joking, because for the last 3 years, I've watched Dom see all his projections on offensive line. Right? I am telling you, if he was in the Jets organization the last 3 years and they listened to him based on the players he loved and wanted, we would have had a starting offensive line with like Pro Bowl type players, 3 of them coming after the 3rd round. Okay. Which means we wouldn't have had to waste picks and we would have been able to build this great offensive line. And Joe Douglas would have gotten all the credit and nobody would know who the hell Dom C is. Right? So we don't know for Kansas City that this guy, like Burgos, we don't know. He may have been the Dom C, right? He may have been the guy that had everything right, got his way, got them to listen to him on many picks, and that was what built and made that organization great. Kelce, Mahomes, he might be behind all of it. But he also might have been the guy that didn't want Mahomes and didn't want Kelce.
Yeah,
right? So, I mean, we don't know. So the only thing we do know is that they're coming from a winning culture, so they know what a winning organization feels like. They know what the office feels like, what the organization, the culture, what it feels like, and what's not good. Meaning, when you have a backup running back screaming and yelling and causing problems in the locker room, as much as you think, how are we going to replace him, that's not as big a problem as getting him out of the building the next day. Or a wide receiver who's clearly not panning out anyway, bitching and complaining about his role, and being able to say goodbye to a 2nd-round pick. Maybe knowing, because I was part of a winning organization, that's what winning organizations do. that they're able to eat the mistake and they're able to say, I'm going to let go of that pick. I know he was a second-round pick, but I'm going to somehow detach myself and know that he's a cancer in that locker room and get rid of him.
That's a good point. Jason Edwards, longtime member, our guy Jason, says, what up, fellas? Whoever our GM will be, I just don't want another 𝐒𝐿 or �McKagan. Those would be it would be pretty bad if the Jets got someone who turned out to be 𝐒𝐿 or �McKagan. Luckily, that's a pretty low bar to clear, so I think they should be okay.
Yeah. By the way, Jason, thanks, for being a member. Thanks for being here. I love you, Jason. You're the best.
He's the best.
My best to your family. And yeah, look, that's what we don't want. So when you talk about a director of personnel that's been on three different organizations that have won Super Bowls, you know what that tells me? Incredibly high ceiling, but because we didn't know his role on those teams, right? And he's never been even an assistant GM, a really low floor. So that's just a little bit more of a gamble, and it's not necessarily a bad thing if he comes in and you love him in the interview. And he has a reputation for being the guy that was banging on the table for the right guys. If all of that's in place, and if he is a guy that understood the money part, right, and shows you in the interview, like, this is how I balance the cap. Just because you're not known for it doesn't mean we don't know. Any individual can come into that room and say, I was the personnel guy, but let me show you my ability to manage a salary cap and blow you away and totally know what he's doing. I think Frankie could do that. Nobody in the NFL knows who Frankie from Flatbush is, but I promise you, if he spent a lot of time on it, he'd be able to come in there and be able to manage a salary cap.
100%.
Right? We've all just from knowing him. So yeah, we just don't know what goes on behind those interview rooms. But I will say, if some guys are more of a gamble and are going to have a lower floor, but you tell me you're coming from three different organizations that have been in Super Bowls, you definitely have a high ceiling.
I would think so. If you just take something from each one of those spots and put that here, you're going to have a pretty good shot. Yeah. I think we got time for one more comment. I think it's the perfect comment to close the show on. Dano says, I hope the Senior Bowl rental has a plunger.
The fact that I have every intention of hitting up Crystal Burger, and if that's anything like White Castle, I think that's a really smart, insightful comment.
that poor person having to clean up that Airbnb after you're done in there.
Dylan has to share the bathroom that I use.
I can't wait. I said at the beginning, I can't wait for all the content that you, Dom C, Dylan, friend of the show, and everyone else who's down there get from the Senior Bowl. It's going to be a lot of fun. Next week, we'll have Jeremy calling in, likely from the field at the Senior Bowl. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy and wild. I'm looking forward to it as well.
All right. Yeah. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us on this episode. Before we get out of here, make sure to like the video, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I'm Matt. He's Jeremy. And we'll catch you next time.
All right.